It was a Sunday morning like any other. The kind where sunlight filters through stained glass windows and paints the wooden pews in shades of amber and gold. I sat beside Margaret, my best friend of 20 years, listening to the choir's voices rise and fall like waves against a shore. Their hymn was beautiful, something about grace and redemption, but my mind had already begun to wander. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The woman sitting 3 rows ahead, slightly to the left, had her hand resting on the pew in front of her. And on her wrist, gleaming under the soft church light, was a watch I would recognize anywhere. A man's gold watch, custom-made, with our initials engraved on the back. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked hard, leaning forward slightly, trying to convince myself I was wrong. Maybe it was just similar. Maybe lots of people had watches like that. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my heart was already hammering against my ribs, telling me what my mind refused to accept. That was Daniel's watch. The one I had saved for months to buy him. The one I'd given him on our 10th anniversary with trembling hands and tears in my eyes, telling him it symbolized all the time we'd spend together, past, present, and future. And it was on another woman's wrist. Margaret leaned over and whispered something about the pastor's sermon. But her words sounded like they were coming from underwater. Everything around me seemed to blur except for that watch. I couldn't look away. My palms grew damp. My throat tightened. The woman adjusted her position, and the watch caught the light again, winking at me like it knew exactly what it was doing. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with dark hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She wore a cream-colored dress that looked expensive, understated. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would make you look twice, except for that watch. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk over there and demand to know where she got it. But my legs felt like lead, and 1,000 questions were already spiraling through my mind. How did she have it? Why was she wearing it? Did Daniel give it to her? No, that couldn't be it. There had to be another explanation. But even as I told myself that, a sickening feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. The kind that comes when you realize you've been ignoring signs for far too long. When the service finally ended, I could barely remember a single word the pastor had said. Margaret touched my arm, asking if I was okay, and I nodded automatically, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. "I'm fine," I whispered, "just feeling a little off." She squeezed my hand and headed toward the exit, but I stayed rooted in place, watching as the woman with the watch stood and began gathering her things. She moved gracefully, unhurried, as if she belonged here, as if she had every right to wear what was mine. I told myself there had to be an explanation, but deep down, something inside me already knew the truth. Daniel and I met 23 years ago at a community barbecue. He was standing by the grill, laughing at someone's joke, and when he smiled at me across the lawn, I felt my whole world tilt on its axis. He was charming in that effortless way, the yee-yaw-ee kind of man who could make you feel like the only person in the room with just a glance. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. I wore my grandmother's veil, and he cried when I walked down the aisle. That memory still lives in my chest, like a warm ember, even now. For years, we built a life that looked perfect from the outside. A modest but comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. Sunday mornings at church, dinners with friends, vacations to the coast where we'd walk barefoot on the beach and talk about growing old together. He worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, traveling occasionally but never excessively. I taught English at the local high school, filling our home with stacks of books and the smell of coffee. We fit together like 2 pieces of a puzzle that were always meant to connect, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see the cracks forming. Small. At first, barely noticeable, like hairline fractures in glass. It started maybe 6 months ago. Daniel began staying late at the office more often. When I'd ask about his day, his answers grew shorter, more vague. He'd check his phone constantly, even during dinner, and when I'd glance over, he'd tilt the screen away. "Just work stuff," he'd say with a tired smile. "Nothing important." I believed him because I wanted to, because trusting him was easier than questioning him. Then came the late-night phone calls. He'd step outside onto the back porch, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite hear. When I asked who it was, he'd say it was his colleague, Jeff, dealing with some client crisis. "You know how demanding this job can be," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "I'll be done soon." And I'd nod and go back to grading papers, pushing down the unease that had started to take root in my chest. There were the sudden business trips, too, weekends in cities he'd visited a dozen times before, but now seemed urgent and unavoidable. He'd pack his bag with the same care he always had, kiss me goodbye, and promise to call when he landed. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he didn't. I started sleeping on his side of the bed when he was gone, just to feel less alone. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for him, finding only cold sheets and silence. Our friends thought we were the ideal couple. Sarah from church would often say, "You two are relationship goals," and I'd smile and thank her, feeling like a fraud, because the truth was, I'd started to feel like I was living with a stranger, a man who looked like my husband but felt distant, unreachable, like he'd built an invisible wall between us that I couldn't scale. Still, I told myself it was just a rough patch. All marriages go through them, right? We'd been together over 20 years. We'd weathered storms before, but on that Sunday morning, sitting in that pew and staring at my husband's watch on another woman's wrist, I realized I'd been living in denial. All those late nights, those hushed phone calls, those distant looks, they weren't nothing. They were everything. If I had listened to my gut back then, maybe I wouldn't have been sitting in that pew questioning everything. I didn't leave the church immediately. Instead, I lingered near the fellowship hall, pretending to admire the bulletin board covered in ministry announcements and community events. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my skirt, trying to look casual while my heart threatened to pound its way out of my chest. The woman with the watch was still inside, chatting with a small group near the altar. From where I stood, I could hear fragments of their conversation, something about the weather, someone's new grandchild, the upcoming Christmas pageant. Her voice was soft, pleasant, normal. Everything about her seemed normal, except for that watch. Margaret had already left, texting me that she'd see me for coffee on Tuesday. I sent back a thumbs-up emoji, my fingers barely steady enough to type. I waited, watched, felt like a detective in my own life, investigating a crime I wasn't even sure had been committed yet. Finally, the group dispersed, and she walked toward the side exit alone. This was my chance. If I didn't approach her now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering. I'd drive myself mad with questions that had no answers, so I moved. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sounding stranger than I intended. She turned, her expression open and friendly. Up close, she was even prettier. Clear skin, kind eyes, a smile that reached all the way to the corners of her mouth. "Yes?" she said warmly. "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, my rehearsed words already crumbling. I noticed you're new here. I don't think we've met." "Oh, yes." She extended her hand, and I shook it automatically. Her grip was firm but gentle. "I'm Clara Bennett. I just moved to town a few weeks ago." "I'm Evelyn," I managed, my eyes flicking involuntarily to her wrist. The watch was right there, inches from my face, mocking me with its familiarity. "It's nice to meet you, Evelyn. Everyone here has been so welcoming." She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, and the watch shifted slightly, catching the light again. "I have to say, this is one of the loveliest churches I've been to." "We're glad to have you," I said mechanically. My throat felt tight. "Are you here alone, or—" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with all the things I couldn't bring myself to say directly. "Oh, actually, I've been coming with someone special," she said, and her whole face lit up with a kind of joy that made my stomach turn. "He's been showing me around town, introducing me to people. He's wonderful, really." The world tilted. That's nice," I whispered, forcing the words out. "What's his name?" "Daniel," she said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she had every right to say his name with that kind of affection. "Daniel Shaw, do you know him?" Everything went silent. The sounds of the church, People chatting, children laughing, doors closing, all faded into a dull roar. I could see her lips still moving, saying something else, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. Daniel Shaw. My Daniel. My husband, are you okay? Clara's hand touched my arm, concern flooding her features. You look pale. I'm fine, I lied, stepping back. I forgot I have somewhere to be. It was nice meeting you, Clara. I turned and walked away before she could respond, before my legs gave out entirely, before the scream building in my chest could escape. When she said his name, the world around me went silent. I don't remember driving home. One moment I was in the church parking lot, fumbling with my keys, and the next I was sitting in my driveway, staring at our house like it belonged to someone else. Daniel's car was there. He was home. I sat for 10 minutes, maybe longer, trying to gather the courage to walk inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Clara was confused. Maybe there was another Daniel Shaw in town. Maybe this was all some cosmic coincidence that would make sense once I talked to him. But I knew better. When I finally opened the front door, Daniel was in the living room, watching a football game with a beer in his hand. He looked so normal, so perfectly ordinary, like he wasn't destroying our entire life. Hey, honey, he said without looking up. How was church? Interesting, I replied, my voice flat. I set my purse on the entry table and walked into the room, standing between him and the television. He glanced up, confused. Everything okay? I met someone new today, I said slowly, watching his face. Her name is Clara Bennett. Nothing. Not even a flicker. That's nice, he said, reaching for the remote to adjust the volume. She was wearing your watch, Daniel. His hand froze. The color drained from his face in slow motion, like I was watching him realize, second by second, that his carefully constructed lie was crumbling. What? Your watch, I repeated, my voice beginning to shake. The one I gave you for our 10th anniversary. The gold one with our initials engraved on the back. She was wearing it. Evelyn, don't. I held up my hand. Don't you dare lie to me right now. I saw it with my own eyes. I talked to her. She told me about you, about how you've been showing her around town, about how you're someone special. He set down his beer and stood, running his hands through his hair. The gesture was so familiar it hurt. Let me explain. Then explain, I said, my voice breaking. Explain how your watch ended up on another woman's wrist. Explain who Clara Bennett is and why she thinks you're wonderful. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my husband of 21 years struggle to find words, his mouth opening and closing like he'd forgotten how to speak. It's not what you think, he finally said. Then what is it, Daniel? Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I never meant for this to happen. Those words, that phrase, hit me like a physical blow. Because it meant it was true. All of it. How long? I whispered. Evelyn. How long, Daniel? A year, he said quietly. So quietly I almost didn't hear him. A little over a year. 52 weeks, 365 days. While I'd been teaching my students, making dinner, sleeping beside him, believing we were building a future, he'd been building something else entirely with someone else. I met her through work, he continued, his voice hollow. She was a pharmaceutical rep who came to one of our conferences. We started talking and then, I don't know how it happened, Evelyn. I swear I didn't plan it. You didn't plan it? I laughed, a harsh sound that didn't sound like me at all. You didn't plan to have an affair? For a year? You didn't plan to give her the watch I gave you? The one that symbolized our marriage? I'm sorry, he said, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said simply. You did hurt me. You're hurting me right now. He reached for me, but I stepped back, putting distance between us that felt both physical and infinite. Where is she now? I asked. What? Clara, where does she live? Here in town? He nodded slowly. She moved here 2 months ago. She wanted to be closer. 2 months. While I'd been planning our anniversary trip, she'd been packing boxes and relocating her entire life to be near my husband. Get out, I said. Evelyn, get out! I screamed, the words tearing from somewhere deep inside me. Get out of my house right now. He stood, looking lost and small, and walked toward the bedroom. I heard him gathering things, keys, wallet, shoes. When he came back, his jacket in hand, he paused at the door. I love you, he said. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do. If you loved me, I replied, my voice steady now, empty, you wouldn't have done this. The door closed behind him, and I was alone. I stood in that living room, in the home we'd built together, and felt my heart shatter into pieces so small I didn't know if I'd ever be able to put them back together. I thought my heart had shattered, but I was only beginning to understand what true betrayal felt like. The first 3 days after Daniel left were the hardest. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done in 15 years of teaching. I couldn't imagine standing in front of my students, pretending everything was fine while my entire world had imploded. I cried until there were no tears left. I screamed into pillows. I threw his coffee mug against the kitchen wall and watched it shatter, feeling a grim satisfaction at the destruction. But on the 4th day, something shifted. I woke up and realized I was done crying. Done screaming. Done breaking things that wouldn't fix what was broken inside me. It was time to think clearly. Daniel had been calling and texting constantly, begging to talk, to explain, to work things out. I'd ignored every message. But now, sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, I opened my laptop and started doing something more productive than mourning. I started planning. First, I documented everything. Every late-night phone call I could remember, every suspicious business trip, every lie he'd told. I went through our phone records online and highlighted every number I didn't recognize. I checked our credit card statements and found charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in cities he'd supposedly visited alone. The evidence was overwhelming. How had I been so blind? Then I called my friend Rachel, who happened to be one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. She'd handled Margaret's divorce 3 years ago, and I'd watched how efficiently she'd protected Margaret's interests. Evelyn, Rachel said when she answered, her voice filled with concern. Margaret told me what happened. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, I said, my voice calm and measured. Just help me protect myself. I'll do better than that, she promised. We met that afternoon at her office downtown. She listened to everything, from the watch to Clara to Daniel's confession. She took notes, asked questions, and by the end of our 2-hour meeting, we had a strategy. The house is in both names? She confirmed. Yes, but I inherited the down payment from my father. I have documentation of that. Good, we can use that. And his affair, that's going to work in your favor too, especially since it's been ongoing. Any chance there are financial entanglements with this woman? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm going to find out, Rachel smiled grimly. I like the way you're thinking. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize, methodical, strategic, cold in a way that felt both foreign and necessary. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Denise, who came highly recommended. She followed Daniel and Clara, documenting their meetings, their dinners, the nights he spent at her apartment across town. The photos she brought me should have hurt more than they did. Daniel and Clara holding hands in a parking lot, kissing goodbye outside a restaurant, looking at each other the way he used to look at me. But I felt nothing. Just a detached curiosity, like I was watching strangers in a movie. There's more, Denise said during one of our meetings. He's been withdrawing cash regularly, large amounts. I think he might be planning to leave. Planning to leave or planning to hide assets? I asked. Could be both. That's when I moved on the house. With Rachel's help, I quietly had the deed transferred entirely into my name, using the inheritance documentation and Daniel's adultery as legal leverage. It took some maneuvering, but within 3 weeks, the house was mine. Solely, completely mine. Daniel had no idea. I also opened a separate bank account and began transferring money from our joint account, carefully, strategically, nothing that would raise immediate flags, but enough to secure my future. He'd been living at a hotel since I'd kicked him out. Still calling occasionally, still asking if we could meet and talk. I'd been vague, non-committal, telling him I needed time, but now I was ready. on what would have been our 22nd anniversary. I called him. "Daniel," I said when he answered, hearing the hope in his voice when he said my name. "I think we should talk. Can you come to dinner tomorrow night? At the house?" "Yes," he said immediately. "Yes, of course." "Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for giving me a chance to—" 7 o'clock, I interrupted. "Don't be late." I spent the next day preparing carefully. I wore the same blue dress I'd worn on our 10th anniversary, the night I'd given him that watch. I set the table with our wedding china. I cooked his favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes. Everything looked perfect, like we were about to celebrate, not end. At 7 sharp, Daniel knocked on the door. When I opened it, his eyes widened. "You look beautiful," he breathed. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping aside to let him in. "Dinner's ready." We sat across from each other at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals. He talked nervously, telling me how much he'd missed me, how sorry he was, how he'd ended things with Clara. I let him talk while I ate calmly, watching him like you'd watch a stranger confessing their sins. When dessert came, his favorite apple pie, I finally spoke. "I have something for you," I said, standing and retrieving a small box from the sideboard, the same box that had held his watch 22 years ago. His face lit up with confusion and hope as I placed it in front of him. "Open it," I said softly. He did. Inside was nothing but the engraving I'd had made all those years ago. Just the empty velvet lining and the small inscription card that read, "For all the time we'll share. Forever, Evelyn." His face fell as understanding washed over him. "The watch is gone," I said. "Just like everything else you gave away. Our trust, our future, our marriage." "Evelyn, the papers are being filed tomorrow," I continued, my voice steady. "I'm divorcing you. The house is in my name now, legally, completely. You'll be hearing from my attorney about dividing everything else." He stared at me, speechless, the empty box still in his hands. "You need to leave now," I said, standing. "This is my home. Not ours. Mine." He stood slowly, like a man moving through water. "I never meant—" "I know," I said. "You never meant to hurt me. But you did, and now you get to live with that." I walked him to the door, opened it, and waited. As he stepped into the night, he turned back one last time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know you are," I replied. "But sorry doesn't give me back the year you stole. Sorry doesn't erase Clara. Sorry doesn't fix what you broke." I closed the door quietly and locked it. Then I walked back to the dining room, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in the silence of my home, really and truly mine now. He finally realized what it felt like to lose something that once meant everything. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. 4 months of lawyers and paperwork and negotiations that felt more like business transactions than the ending of a 21-year marriage. Rachel fought hard for me, and in the end I kept the house, half of his retirement account, and enough from the settlement to feel secure for the first time in months. Daniel moved in with Clara. I heard through Margaret, who heard through her sister, who knew someone at Daniel's company. They rented a condo on the other side of town, trying to start their life together properly, now that it was no longer a secret. I wondered sometimes if Clara knew what she'd gotten. A man who could lie for a year, who could look his wife in the eyes and smile while hiding another woman in the shadows. Did she trust him? Did she wonder late at night if he was capable of doing the same thing to her? But mostly I didn't think about them at all. Clara stopped coming to church. I assumed she felt uncomfortable or guilty, or maybe Daniel asked her to stay away. Either way, I never saw her again in that sanctuary where this had all begun. The house felt different now. Emptier, but not in a bad way. It was like clearing out a cluttered closet. You lose things, but you gain space to breathe. I repainted the bedroom a soft sage green instead of the beige Daniel had insisted on. I bought new throw pillows for the couch. I rearranged the furniture in the living room so it didn't remind me of all those nights watching him on his phone, lying to my face. Little by little, I was reclaiming the space, making it mine. Margaret came over most weekends. We'd sit on the back porch with iced tea or wine, depending on the weather and our moods, and she'd let me talk or not talk, whatever I needed. "How are you really doing?" she asked one Saturday afternoon, giving me that searching look only best friends can give. "Some days are harder than others," I admitted. "But I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I think I'm starting to feel like myself again." "You're stronger than you know," she said, squeezing my hand. I had to be. The school year had ended, giving me the summer to process everything without the pressure of standing in front of students. I spent my days reading, gardening, taking long walks through the neighborhood I'd lived in for 2 decades, but felt like I was seeing for the first time. I started going to a therapist, Dr. Monroe, a kind woman in her 60s who specialized in trauma and betrayal. At first, I resisted the idea. I wasn't the kind of person who needed therapy. But Margaret had gently insisted, and I was grateful she had. "Betrayal isn't just about the other person's actions," Dr. Monroe told me during one session. "It's about how those actions change your understanding of your own story. You thought you were living one life, and suddenly you realize it was something else entirely. That's disorienting." She was right. The hardest part wasn't even Daniel leaving or Clara existing. It was looking back at the last year, the last several years, and questioning everything. Every smile, every "I love you," every moment I'd felt secure. Had any of it been real? "Some of it was," Dr. Monroe assured me. "People are complicated. He probably did love you in his way, but he also made choices that betrayed that love. Both things can be true." It was a strange comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. By August, I'd started saying yes to things again. Dinners with colleagues, a book club Sarah from church had invited me 2 months ago, a weekend trip to visit my sister in Vermont. I was rebuilding, slowly, piece by piece. One Sunday morning, the first Sunday I'd worked up the courage to return to church, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple yellow sundress and my grandmother's pearl earrings. I felt nervous as I walked into the sanctuary, worried people would stare or whisper, but they didn't. People smiled and welcomed me back, not with pity, but with genuine warmth. I found my usual spot and sat down, 3 rows from the front, slightly to the right. The same place I'd been sitting that morning months ago when everything changed. The choir began to sing, their voices lifting toward the vaulted ceiling. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in familiar colors, and I realized something profound. I wasn't afraid anymore. For months, I'd been terrified of being alone, of being judged, of not being enough. But sitting there in that pew, surrounded by community and light and music, I felt something different. Peace. Not the kind of peace that means everything is perfect, but the kind that means you've survived something terrible and come out the other side. I thought about the watch, that stupid, beautiful, symbolic watch that had started this entire unraveling. I'd hated it for so long, seeing it as the thing that exposed my husband's betrayal. But now, I saw it differently. That watch had been a gift, yes. But more than that, it had been a truth-teller. It had revealed what I'd been too afraid to see, and in doing so, it had set me free. After the service, I lingered for a moment, standing in the same spot where I'd confronted Clara all those months ago. The memory didn't sting the way it used to. Margaret found me and linked her arm through mine. "Ready to go?" "Actually," I said, surprised by my own words, "I think I'll stay for coffee hour." "I'd like to catch up with people," she grinned. "That's my girl." That afternoon, sitting in the fellowship hall with a paper cup of mediocre coffee and a homemade cookie, surrounded by familiar faces and easy conversation, I realized I hadn't just survived. I was living again. For the first time in months, I whispered a prayer, not for him, but for myself. It's been almost a year since that Sunday morning when I saw the watch. A full circle around the sun, back to the same season where everything fell apart and somehow came back together. I still live in the same house, though it bears little resemblance to the home Daniel and I shared. The walls are different colors now. The furniture has been rearranged. I planted roses in the front garden, something I'd always wanted, but he'd never liked. It's mine now, in every sense of the word. I heard through the grapevine that Daniel and Clara broke up 3 months ago. Apparently, she found text messages on his phone from yet another woman. I suppose some people never learn. When Margaret told me, I waited for satisfaction to hit, for that sweet taste of vindication. But all I felt was a vague sadness for Clara, and maybe a little for Daniel too. Not because I missed him, but because I realized he'd probably never figure out what he was searching for. I don't wear my wedding ring anymore. I keep it in a drawer, along with old photographs and letters, artifacts of a life that used to be mine but isn't anymore. Sometimes I look at them, the way you'd look at historical documents, with curiosity but not pain. The watch itself is gone. I don't know if Clara kept it or threw it away or gave it back to Daniel. I don't really care. It served its purpose. Because here's what I've learned. That watch wasn't just a symbol of love or even of betrayal. It was a teacher. It taught me that time stops for no one, not for marriage, not for denial, not for the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. That watch had stopped ticking long before I noticed, just like our marriage had been dying in ways I'd refused to see. It taught me to pay attention, to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, to ask questions even when I'm afraid of the answers. Most importantly, it taught me that endings, as painful as they are, can also be beginnings. I started dating again a few months ago, nothing serious. Just coffee here and there with people I meet through friends or online. It feels strange and new, like learning to walk after being bedridden. But it also feels good, hopeful. I'm not looking to replace what I lost. I'm looking to build something different, something better, with someone who understands that honesty isn't negotiable and that love without integrity is just pretty words. Last week, I bought myself a gift, a delicate silver watch with a mother-of-pearl face. It's nothing like Daniel's gold monstrosity. It's mine, chosen by me, for me. When the jeweler asked if I wanted it engraved, I almost said no. But then I changed my mind. On the back, in small, elegant script, it says, "Time is mine now, because it is." My time, my life, my choices. No one gets to steal that from me again. Sometimes people ask me if I regret anything, marrying Daniel, believing him for so long, not seeing the signs sooner. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain. I regret the year he stole. I regret that I ignored my own intuition. But I don't regret the woman I've become because of it. Stronger, wiser, more careful with my heart, but also more open to joy. I've learned that some betrayals break you, others set you free. And I am free now, in ways I never was before. Free to choose my own path, free to define my own happiness, free to trust again when I'm ready, and free to walk away when I'm not. The watch may have stopped ticking, but I didn't. I kept going. I'm still going, and that, I think, is the greatest revenge of all. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? I'd love to know I'm not alone in this journey we call life.